My name is Jesse, and I work as a camp counselor in southeastern Ohio. Camp Black Ridge sits about 25 minutes outside a town called Rivermill, just off State Route 550. If you drive too fast, you'll miss the turn. There's a wooden sign nailed to two thick posts that says Black Ridge in faded green paint, and behind it runs a gravel road that looks more like a logging trail than an entrance. Once you're on it, call service drops to one bar if you're lucky. I took the job the first summer because I needed money and I didn't want to move back in with my parents. I just finished college. Everyone I knew was either moving into apartments they couldn't afford or taking entry-level jobs where they wore button-down shirts and tried to sound confident in meetings. I wasn't ready for that yet. I didn't want to start worrying about 401ks or dental plans or whether my boss secretly hated me. Camp felt like a pause button. The pay wasn't great. You got a bunk in a staff cabin, 3 meals a day, and a small stipend at the end of the summer. But you also got to wake up with the sun and fall asleep exhausted in a way that felt earned. You spent your days outside instead of staring at a screen, and you spent most of your time around kids who still thought the world was interesting. That part mattered more than I expected. Kids are not jaded yet. They don't wake up already tired of the week. They don't scroll through news feeds looking for something to be angry about like the rest of us do. They don't sit around arguing about mortgages or layoffs or whether they're behind in life. They care about real, immediate things. Whether they can climb the ropes course without freezing halfway up. Whether their cabin wins Capture the Flag. Whether the frog they found by the dock is a bullfrog or just a big toad. You tell a 10-year-old, you can do hard things. And they believe you. They try again, they fall, scrape a knee, wipe their face, and try again anyway. They don't spend 20 minutes overthinking it. I run the outdoor skills rotation. Knots, basic map reading, fire safety, simple shelter building. The first time a kid tied a clean bowline and realized it wouldn't slip no matter how hard you pulled, their whole face changed. It was like you'd handed them something secret, something useful, something that belonged to them. And that's why I keep coming back. Camp Black Ridge sits in a wide clearing carved into the forest. Southeastern Ohio isn't flat, it rolls. Hills fold into each other like waves made of trees. The forest here is mostly oak and maple, with some sycamore near the water and thick patches of ferns closer to the low ground. In July, the air smells like pine sap, damp earth, and sunscreen. There are 8 cabins total, 4 for boys, 4 for girls, lined up in a loose horseshoe. They're simple wooden structures raised slightly off the ground on concrete blocks. Each one has 2 rows of bunks, narrow windows on either side, and a metal roof that pops when it cools at night. In the center of the clearing sits the mess hall. It's the largest building on camp property, built like a barn with green metal roofing and a wide porch that wraps halfway around. Inside are long wooden tables bolted to the floor. By day 3 of every session, the floor is permanently sticky from spilled juice. Behind the mess hall is the lodge, a heavier, older building made of dark stone and thick timber beams. That's where staff meetings happen. That's where the fireplace is. That's where Halverson hands out the rules. Off to the east, a dirt path slopes gently downward toward Wolf Creek. The creek widens near camp into something that feels more like a small lake than a creek. The water is brown-green, shallow near the shore, but darker toward the center. There's a wooden dock that stretches out about 20 feet, with old canoe racks nearby and a stack of bright orange life vests hanging on hooks. West of the cabins are the sports fields. Field 1 and 2 are close to camp and well cleared. Field 3 is farther out, near the tree line. At the edge of Field 3 stands a broken birch tree, snapped in half by a storm years ago. The trunk leans sideways at an angle, like it tried to fall and changed its mind halfway down. Past that tree, the woods get thicker. North of camp, through a narrow trail and past a stretch of tall grass, stands an old chain-link fence surrounding what used to be a quarry. The fence is rusted and sagging in places, but it's still intact. We call it the quarry fence. The gravel parking lot sits near the entrance road. It holds staff cars and the occasional parent vehicle on drop-off day. Once the parents leave, the lot feels empty. Most summers, Camp Black Ridge feels like the safest place in Ohio. This summer didn't. Now, orientation happened in the lodge on the first full day after the campers arrived. The lodge was the oldest structure on the property. Thick timber beams ran across the ceiling, darkened by years of humidity and smoke. The stone fireplace along the far wall hadn't been lit in years, but it still smelled faintly of ash if you stood close enough. Above it hung a framed newspaper clipping from 1998 about Camp Black Ridge winning some regional youth award. The glass was cracked in one corner. Nobody replaced it. Nobody removed it either. The staff sat on wooden benches facing Halverson, and he didn't waste time. He stood in front of the fireplace with a stack of laminated sheets and handed them out one by one. The plastic was worn and cloudy around the edges from years of being reused. "Read them," he said. "Memorize them. You enforce them. You do not improvise." There were 7 rules printed in bold. Some were normal and some weren't. Halverson read them out loud. After he finished, he didn't explain them the way you'd expect. He didn't tell stories or give background. He just clarified exactly how they were meant to be followed. Later, once we were dismissed, I read them again on my own. Rule 1. Missing kid. Count shoes first. At first glance, it sounded like a strange way to do a head count. But the logic was simple. If a kid wandered out on their own, they'd usually grab their shoes. If their shoes were still neatly under the bunk, something else was wrong. Rule 1 wasn't about panic. It was about stopping panic. You didn't scatter into the woods shouting names. You didn't send half the staff running blind. You checked the bunk. You confirmed the shoes, and you followed procedure. It forced discipline before fear could take over. Rule 2. Field 3 ends at the broken birch. Now every camp has boundaries, and ours had a tree. Field 3 was farther out than the others, pressed tight against the forest. The broken birch leaned at an angle at the edge of the grass, like it'd been frozen mid-fall, and that tree marked the line. No games past it. No equipment retrieval past it. No, just a few steps into the woods. It didn't matter if it was a ball or a water bottle. If it crossed the birch, it stayed. We replaced gear. We didn't cross the line. Rule 3. If the woods call your name, do not answer. This one was the hardest for new staff to take seriously. It sounded like something you'd tell kids around a campfire to scare them. But the instruction was specific. Do not answer. It didn't say you'd hear a growl. It didn't say you'd hear something monstrous. It said it might sound like someone you trusted. You didn't shout back. You didn't step into the tree line to check. You walked toward light. You radioed it. You stayed where other people could see you. Simple. Rule 4. The lake has vampires. We call them lake vampires. Now this one gets laughs every year. It wasn't written like folklore, it was written like a water policy. At dusk, campers were out of the water. No sitting at the dock, no dangling feet, no leaning over the edge to rinse hands. If you saw ripples moving against the wind near the shoreline, you cleared the area. If you saw something pale beneath the surface, you backed away slowly. You didn't shine flashlights into the water. You didn't throw rocks. You didn't test it. You respected the boundary. The rule didn't describe them as magical. It didn't even describe them much at all, actually. It treated them kind of like wildlife. Dangerous, Territorial wildlife. Rule 5. If you hear tapping at a cabin window after lights out, you turn every light on. Cabins settle at night. Branches scrape siding. Animals wander. But this rule wasn't about guessing what it was. You didn't open the window. You didn't step outside alone to check it out. You turned on every overhead light. You woke the second counselor. You accounted for every camper immediately. You created visibility. Whatever tapped didn't like light. Rule 6. Nobody goes near the quarry fence after dark. The quarry sat north of camp, fenced off with old chain link that had rusted but not fallen. There was no program activity up there. No reason for campers to approach it. If you saw someone standing near that fence after sunset, the rule was clear. It wasn't staff. You locked the lodge, you called Halverson. You did not approach. The rule didn't speculate on what might be there. It just drew a line. And Rule 7. 3 whistle blasts mean freeze, count, regroup. This one was straightforward. 3 blasts overrode everything. No chasing or splitting up. No hero runs into the woods. Everyone returned to the lit area and stayed there until accounted for. It was a reset button. In chaos, you didn't add motion, you removed it. After orientation ended, the rules were never discussed in detail again. They weren't posted on cabin walls. They weren't explained to campers beyond what was necessary. They just existed. Printed, laminated, passed down. Like they'd been there longer than any of us. Most summers they felt a little excessive, like overbuilt safety measures for a place that was already safe. That summer, they felt needed. The first real test of the rules happened on the 3rd day of the session. It was late afternoon, the sun sitting low enough to cast long shadows across the grass. Field 3 always felt different from the other 2 fields. Field 1 and Field 2 were close enough to the cabins that you could still hear the mess hall door slam or a counselor yelling for sunscreen. Field 3 sat farther out, pressed tight against the forest. The broken birch marked the edge. From a distance, it just looked like a dead tree. Up close, you could see where the trunk had split years ago, the wood bleached pale by sun and rain. Kids used it as a base during games. Staff used it as a line. That afternoon, we were running Capture the Flag. 40 kids split into 2 teams, red bandanas versus blue. The air was thick and humid. Sweat darkened the backs of shirts. Grass clung to shoes. The kind of energy that builds when kids have been sitting through morning rotations and finally get to run. I was stationed near the broken birch with Megan. It was mostly precautionary. We didn't expect trouble. We just enforced the boundary. "Stay in bounds," Megan called as 2 boys veered too close to the trees. They corrected course without complaint. And for a while it was normal. Shouting, laughter. Somebody tripped and rolled dramatically. A kid insisted he hadn't been tagged when everybody clearly saw it. And then the ball went wide. One of the older boys tried to make a long throw. It slipped from his hand and sailed past the edge of the field. It bounced once in the tall grass and rolled straight toward the broken birch. Half the field groaned at once. "Leave it! Out of bounds!" But Evan Porter was already moving. Evan was 10, quick and skinny, competitive in a way only a 10-year-old could be. He sprinted across the grass before I could even shout his name. He ducked past the broken birch and into the trees without slowing down. And I moved without thinking. "Evan," I called. I crossed the line. And the difference was immediate. Sound dulled behind me. The shouting from the field softened, like someone had closed a door. The ground shifted from dry grass to softer earth, layered with leaves and pine needles. The air felt cooler under the canopy. "Got it," Evan said ahead of me. He bent to grab the ball. "Leave it," I said. "We don't need it." He hesitated, then straightened up. And that was when I noticed the second ball. It sat a few yards deeper into the trees, half hidden in brush. Faded red, mud-caked, deflated along one seam. It wasn't ours. Evan noticed it too. "Was that from last year?" he asked. I didn't answer. My eyes kept moving. A strip of fabric hung from a thorn branch nearby, blue cotton and torn at the edge. I stepped closer. It was a camp shirt. The Black Ridge logo barely visible under dirt and weathering. It was old, not from this week. "Jesse?" Evan said quietly. The woods felt wrong. Quiet. No birds or insects. No wind pushing through leaves. And then something shifted to our left. A quick, low movement between two oak trees. I turned slowly. And about 20 yards out, something stood partially obscured by brush. It was low to the ground, long-backed. Its shape didn't rise like a deer. It didn't move with the bounce of a dog. It slid forward a few feet, then stopped. Evan took a small step toward it. "Stay behind me," I said. The shape held still. I couldn't make out clear features, no visible eyes, no obvious fur pattern, just form. And then I heard it. 3 sharp whistle blasts from the direction of camp. Rule 7. Freeze, count, regroup. The sound cut clean through the trees. "Okay," I said, "we're done." I grabbed Evan's shoulder and stepped backward toward the field, keeping my eyes on the spot where the shape stood. It didn't rush us or crash through brush. It simply wasn't there anymore. We crossed quickly back over the broken birch, and sound rushed back in all at once. Kids yelling, Megan blowing her whistle again, someone laughing, unaware. Rick was already moving toward us from across the clearing. He didn't look at Evan first. He looked at me. "You crossed," he said. "Yeah. What did you see?" I don't know. I saw something low, move sideways, fast," I said. Rick nodded once like that confirmed something. Halverson walked over a moment later. "Explain," he said. I told him about the ball, the second ball, the shirt, the movement. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he looked at the broken birch for a long moment. "That is why it's there," he said quietly. Evan stood between us, clutching the ball like it was evidence. "What was that?" he asked. Halverson crouched down so he was level with him. "It wasn't part of the game," he said. "And you don't chase things that aren't part of the game." He stood back up. "Field's closed," he said. The kids groaned, but nobody argued. We redirected them toward Field 1 and ended the game early. On the way back to camp, the energy felt different. Whispers spread fast. "Was it a bear? Did you see eyes? Is that why we can't go past the tree?" I kept my answers short. "Boundaries exist for a reason," I told him. That night at dinner, I noticed Rick scanning the tree line more often than usual. After sunset, I did another walk down to Field 3 alone. I stayed on the grass. The broken birch leaned exactly where it always had, and nothing moved beyond it. But near the base of the tree, half hidden in weeds, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A sneaker. It was caked with dirt and stiff from weather, positioned just past the line. It looked old. The lake looked harmless during the day. Wolf Creek widened near camp into a stretch of water that felt almost lazy. Brown-green surface, dragonflies skimming low. Canoes tied neatly to the dock. Kids lined up in bright orange life vests, waiting for swim checks. If you stood on the dock at noon, you could see the sandy bottom near the edge. You could hear minnows darting in the shallows. You could hear nothing but splashing and laughter. And that was why Rule 4 sounded ridiculous on paper. Lake vampires. We called them that because the rule did, not because anyone had officially confirmed what they were. The third evening after the Field 3 incident, the air cooled earlier than usual. Clouds rolled in from the west and flattened the sunset into a dull orange smear behind the trees. We were finishing open swim. 5 minutes, I called from the dock. Kids groaned, but started paddling toward shore. Megan stood at the edge of the roped swim boundary, counting heads. Rick was near the canoe racks, checking a loose strap. The water looked calm. And then Tyler, the same counselor who had laughed at the rule during orientation, noticed something near the far side of the dock. Did you see that? He asked. See what? I asked. Ripples, he said. There's no wind. And he wasn't wrong. The trees were still. The water near the shoreline was smooth. But about 10 feet out from the dock, a small patch of surface began to shift. Not in a circle like a fish, not in a line like a drifting branch. It moved against the faint current. I stepped closer to the edge of the dock. Everybody out, I said, keeping my voice low. Now. The kids hesitated. Out, Megan repeated, sharper this time. They climbed onto the dock and onto shore in a cluster, dripping and confused. The ripples grew, and something pale appeared just beneath the surface. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe a patch of sky breaking through the clouds. But it held shape. A face, not floating or drifting, just below the waterline. Eyes open. The skin looked white, not like a person's skin underwater, but like something that had never seen the sun. It didn't blink or move its mouth. It just stared upward through the surface. Back up, I said quietly. The kids behind me started whispering. Is that a mask? Is someone under there? And then another pale shape surfaced a few feet away. And another. 3 faces now, just under the water. Tyler stepped forward with a flashlight clipped to his belt. Hold on, it's probably just... Don't, I interrupted. But he was already raising the light. He clicked on it and aimed it directly at the water. The beam cut through the surface and struck the nearest face. For half a second, nothing happened. And then the water exploded. The face shot upward, breaking the surface in a violent surge. A mouth opened wide enough to show rows of teeth that were too narrow and too many. Hands, long-fingered, pale, almost gray, latched onto the edge of the dock. The thing moved fast. Faster than any person could have moved. The dock rattled under impact. Kids screamed. Back, I said. I grabbed the nearest camper, a small boy who had frozen in place, and I yanked him away from the edge. Megan blew her whistle once, sharp and hard. Rick grabbed Tyler by the back of his shirt and dragged him backward as the creature lunged again, its hands scraping against the wood. The flashlight beam wobbled wildly and then fell into the water. For a moment, the pale figure was fully visible above the surface. And then it vanished straight down, taking the ripples with it. The water stilled almost immediately. The other pale faces disappeared beneath the surface in the same smooth motion. Silence fell over the dock. The only sound was heavy breathing. "Everyone inside," Halverson said from behind us. I hadn't even seen him approach. He didn't shout or run, he simply directed. We herded the campers toward the lodge in a tight group. Nobody splashed and nobody looked back. Inside the lodge, Halverson locked the doors. "How many?" he asked Megan. "All accounted for," she said. He nodded once. "The dock is closed until further notice." Tyler was pale. I just shined a light," he muttered. Rick looked at him flatly. "Rules said don't." Nobody argued. That night, lights out came early. Cabins were sealed tight, and I was assigned to Cedar Ridge again. The boys were shaken but buzzing with nervous energy. "Was that the vampires?" one asked. "Yeah," I said. "No more pretending." Around 10:30, the cabin finally quieted. I was halfway asleep when I heard it. There was a tap against the far window. The boys stirred. 3 in a row. Rule 5. I swung my legs off the bunk and I flipped every overhead light on. "Everybody sit up, now," I said. The cabin flooded with yellow light, and the tapping stopped immediately. I walked toward the window but kept distance. The glass reflected the inside of the cabin brightly enough that I couldn't see much beyond it. And then something moved. A shadow passed across the reflection. Not fast, slow, at eye level. I didn't open the window or step outside. I picked up my radio. "Cedar Ridge to Halverson, tapping." "Copy," he replied instantly. "Lights stay on." The boys watched me. One of them whispered, "I think it wants us to open it." Outside, something scraped lightly against the siding, and then it moved away. Rick and Halverson did a full perimeter sweep. They found wet marks along the base of the cabin wall. Not puddles or drips. Handprints. Long-fingered, pale against the wood. They didn't announce it to the campers, but I saw them. By morning, the marks had dried into faint stains. The lake looked calm again at sunrise. The dock was empty. The water surface was smooth and undisturbed. If you hadn't seen it the night before, you would have assumed nothing had happened. The morning after the lake incident felt strangely normal. The sun rose over the trees the same way it always did, burning off the thin layer of mist that hovered just above the water. The dock sat quiet and empty. The lake surface was flat and undisturbed, as if nothing had climbed out of it the night before. Breakfast smelled like scrambled eggs and burnt toast. Kids argued over who got the last carton of chocolate milk. If you'd driven in that morning, you would have thought Camp Blackridge was exactly what it advertised. Archery targets, canoe racks, counselors with clipboards, 40 kids in matching camp shirts. Halverson didn't mention the lake at morning assembly. He just announced that swimming was suspended for maintenance. The campers groaned, but accepted it. Kids adapt faster than adults. By mid-morning, they were complaining about dodgeball instead. But the staff moved differently. Nobody walked alone unless they had to. Radio stayed clipped on and turned up. When someone laughed too loudly near the tree line, heads turned automatically. It was just before lunch when Megan noticed it. She didn't shout or panic. She simply walked toward me with a look on her face that said something was off. "Have you seen Evan?" she asked quietly. I thought she meant on the field. "Not since breakfast," I said. She nodded once. "I'm short one in Cedar Ridge." That was all she said. We didn't scatter or call his name. We followed the rule. Rule 1. We went to the cabin. The boys were lined up outside for a transition to the mess hall, 11 of them. They looked annoyed at being delayed. "Evan's probably in the bathroom," one said. "Or he's messing around," another added. I stepped inside the cabin. The bunks were unmade, in the way only kids can manage. Blankets half hanging, pillows shoved sideways. The morning light filtered through the narrow windows. Evan's bunk was near the back wall. His sleeping bag was still there. His flashlight sat on the small wooden shelf above the bed. I crouched and looked underneath. His sneakers were lined up neatly, side by side. They were dry, laces tied loosely, like he'd taken them off the night before without thinking, and he hadn't put them back on. Megan saw him too. She didn't say anything. We stepped back outside. Halverson was already approaching from the lodge. "He's not in the cabin," Megan said. Halverson looked at me. "Shoes?" "Still there," I replied. He inhaled once through his nose. "Cabin's locked," he began. "Everyone inside, head counts." There was no yelling or chaos. The campers were told there would be a drill. They filed back into cabins with more curiosity than fear. The woods beyond the clearing were still. Rick joined us near the edge of the field. "Lakeside?" he asked. Halverson shook his head slightly. "Start perimeter sweep. Powers only. Stay in sight of clearing." We moved methodically. Nobody crossed the broken birch. No one approached the quarry fence. We checked the mess hall, the bathrooms, the equipment shed. We called Evan's name only once, quietly, near the lodge. There was no answer. Near the path leading down toward Wolf Creek, I noticed something in the grass. The dew hadn't fully burned off yet. It clung to the tips of the blades, bending them slightly under its weight. A trail cut through it. Just a slight disturbance, like someone had walked barefoot along the edge. I followed it with my eyes, and it led downhill toward the lake. I didn't call out. I simply met Megan's eyes and nodded toward the path. When we got there, the dock was empty. The water lay still, reflecting the pale morning sky. The trail ended near the shoreline. The mud at the edge was disturbed, darker than the rest, as if something had stood there for a long time. There were no splashes or drag marks, just the impression of bare feet, standing, facing the water. Halverson joined us a moment later. He studied the mud without stepping closer. "He walked," he said. I shook my head. "Shoes are still at the cabin." Halverson didn't respond right away. We stood there listening. The lake made almost no sound. A single dragonfly skimmed low across the surface and disappeared. "You think they take them during the day?" Megan asked quietly. Halverson's jaw tightened. "They don't take them," he began. "No child has been lost under my watch, you understand? And if they do take them, it's not the way you're thinking." I didn't like that answer. We widened the search, still in pairs, still within sight of the clearing. An hour passed, then another. Camp remained locked down. The kids were restless, but unaware of how serious it was. Near early afternoon, Rick radioed in from the north side. "Fence," he said. You need to see this." The quarry fence stood at the edge of a clearing that felt older than the rest of camp. The grass grew thinner there. The ground felt packed and uneven. Rick was standing a few yards back from the chain link. On the other side of the fence, just beyond the sagging metal, someone was standing. At first glance, I thought it was one of the older campers. Small frame, short hair, facing us. But something about the posture felt wrong. It was too still. The head tilted slightly to one side, as if the neck didn't quite hold it correctly. "Evan?" Megan called. The figure didn't respond. I felt the urge to step forward, to get closer, to confirm. And then I heard it, Jesse? The voice came from somewhere behind us. It was soft and calm, and I turned instinctively, but no one was there. Jesse. This time it sounded closer, familiar. Rule 3. Do not answer. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the figure by the fence. Evan, Halverson said again, louder this time. The shape shifted slightly. Not a step, just a subtle adjustment, like a body settling. I noticed something else then. Feet. Bare, standing on the dirt beyond the fence. The skin looked pale against the darker soil, and too clean, as if it hadn't walked through grass or mud at all. 3 whistle blasts cut through the air just then. Rick had already lifted his whistle to his mouth. Rule 7. Freeze, count, regroup. The sound snapped something inside me back into place, and we stepped backward together without turning our backs. The figure beyond the fence didn't chase. It didn't move at all. It simply stood there as we retreated toward the clearing. By the time we reached the edge of Field 2, the fence was partially obscured by trees again, and when we looked back, the figure was gone. Back in the clearing, Halverson gathered the staff. Full lockdown, he said quietly. No one near water. No one near fence. No one goes near Field 3. What about Evan? Tyler asked. Halverson looked toward the lake and then said, He's still here. By late afternoon, the sky had turned the color of dull metal. Cloud cover rolled in from the west, flattening the light and pressing it low over the tree line. The clearing felt smaller than it had that morning. The campers stayed inside their cabins, with books and card games, restless but obedient. Nobody said the word missing out loud around them. We didn't need to. Halverson had us rotating watch in pairs. No one watched the lake alone. No one near the fence. Nobody near Field 3. It was Megan who saw him first. He's down there, she said quietly. We were standing near the lodge porch when she pointed toward the path that led to Wolf Creek. A small figure stood at the edge of the water, barefoot and still. From a distance, Evan looked calm. Too calm. His arms hung loosely at his sides. His shoulders were relaxed. He wasn't pacing or crying or scanning for help. He was just standing there, facing the lake. The shoreline was only a few inches below the dock level, muddy from years of foot traffic and canoe launches. The water itself lay flat, reflecting the gray sky like polished stone. There was no ripples or visible movement. We walked down the path together, slow and deliberate. No running or shouting. The last thing any of us wanted was to startle him. The air near the water felt colder than it had earlier in the day. Evan didn't turn as we approached. He didn't react at all. When we were about 15 feet behind him, I could see the way his toes were pressed into the mud, as if he'd been standing there for a long time. The mud around his feet was darker, disturbed. The waterline in front of him was smooth. Evan? Megan said. He didn't respond. Halverson shook his head. Don't spook him, he said. If Evan startled and tripped, even half a step, he'd lose his footing in the mud and go straight into the water. And if he broke the surface on his own, there wouldn't be time to pull him back. Just beneath the surface, a pale shape hovered. Then another. 3 faces, faint and distorted by the thin layer of water, looking up at the boy standing on the shore. Jesse, Halverson said quietly. Slow. I stepped forward 1 careful pace at a time. The mud shifted under my shoes. I kept my breathing even, slow enough that it wouldn't draw attention. The water remained flat, The faces beneath it didn't blink. When I was close enough to reach him, I said, "Evan, we're heading back to the cabins." No reaction. His eyes stayed fixed on the leg. I moved closer, and I slipped my arms under his shoulders from behind, and I pulled gently. He resisted at first, not by struggling, but by leaning forward, as if his weight had shifted toward the water. And then the surface broke. One of the pale figures rose just enough that I saw its face clearly. "Back," Halverson said. And I leaned my weight backward and pulled harder. Evan stumbled slightly, his heels dragging lines through the mud. The pale face rose another inch above the water, hands pressing against the edge of the waterline. Long fingers curled into the mud, nails digging in. Megan stepped to the side, not touching Evan, just standing close enough to widen the space between him and the leg. The creature shifted forward. It moved with unsettling smoothness, like something that had practiced leaving water. I felt Evan's weight tilt again, and I tightened my grip. "3," Halverson said quietly. Rick blew the whistle. The sharp triple blast cut through the clearing, and the sound did something. The pale figure paused. Staff members emerged from the path behind us, forming a loose line without being told. And I pulled Evan back another step, then another. His resistance lessened slightly, like tension draining from him. The first creature's fingers slipped from the mud and returned to the water. Its face sank slowly beneath the surface. The others followed, and the lake flattened. The reflection of the gray sky returned. Evan sagged in my arms. His knees buckled, and I caught him just before he hit the ground. For a moment, he just blinked up at us. "Why'd we stop?" he asked. "You were near the lake, honey," Megan said gently. He looked over his shoulder, and the water showed nothing. He looked down at his feet. "I don't remember walking," he said. I didn't answer. We guided him back up the path, steady and quiet. The mud on his feet left faint prints along the trail. Halverson placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. He looked over at me and said, "Good work." The lake remained still for the rest of the evening. At sunset, nobody went near it. That night, there was no tapping at the windows, no voices from the tree line. The woods were quiet, and Evan slept through the night. Camp Black Ridge closed 3 days after we pulled Evan from the lake. The official reason was unsafe wildlife activity in the surrounding forest. Parents were notified, refunds were issued. The dock was dismantled before the last bus even pulled away. Nobody mentioned the things under the water. Evan went home with his parents. He didn't remember walking to the lake. He didn't remember standing there. He didn't remember the lake vampires. He remembered going to sleep. That was it. Halverson didn't hold the dramatic meeting. He didn't give a speech about bravery or danger. He just gathered the staff in the lodge one last time and reminded us of the rules. Nobody argued. Field 3 was shortened the following season. A rope line was installed 10 feet before the broken birch. Swimming hours were cut back. The dock railing was raised higher, and motion lights were added to the cabin exteriors. The rules stayed exactly the same. Count shoes, don't cross the birch line, don't answer your name, clear the lake at dusk, turn the lights on if there's tapping, stay away from the quarry fence, 3 whistle blast mean regroup. Most summers, nothing happens. Most summers, the lake looks calm and the woods stay quiet. That's the part people don't understand. The rules don't exist because something happens every night. They exist because something only needs to happen once. I still work here. I still teach kids how to tie knots and build fires and read maps. I still tell them they can do hard things. But every evening at dusk, I walk down to the shoreline and stare at the water. I watch the surface. Sometimes it's perfectly still. Sometimes it shifts in slow, deliberate patterns that don't match the wind. And sometimes, just beneath the surface, I can see something watching me. Hey, I hope you enjoyed the video. Special thank you to all my patrons. If you'd like to become a supporter on Patreon, there's a link in the description. I hope you have a great night, and thanks for watching.